Welcome to Vibration Cinema, the altered destiny of film. Today we're grappling with Tina Campt's notion of a black gaze, which posits a new way of seeing brought about by the force of black contemporary artists' work. But first we need to define some terms. So, hapticity is the symbiotic relationship between art and spectator. The art has to be commanding and impactful, and the spectator has to be willing to let the work move over them as a full body, all sensory experience. And through the experience, a spectator can recognize their positionality in the complex histories of anti-black violence, and hopefully, by being implicated in that, the spectator will do the work to bridge that gap. This transformative work is called adjacency. Through hapticity, one is able to recognize their positionality to other people. And at that moment, the spectator has a choice to continue to be vulnerable and act to address that gap or not. If the spectator does that reparative work, then the labor of adjacency begins. Mastery and attunement is a way that a spectator experiences work. Mastery is a definitive take, a full understanding of the work. Attunement allows one to experience deeper registers of a work beyond what is rendered in the text or object. It opens art into the realm of the social order. Hapticity and adjacency flip the script on how we normally encounter art. We are not masters of it. One doesn't dissect or understand it intellectually. One is attuned with the frequencies and lets the work them.
And so coming to contemporary art was a similar, is my first path to go towards how do these works resonate in relationship to a genre, right? Or a medium, and to sort of go backwards into that, or to go forwards and say, no, I'm not going to start with mastery. I'm going to start with attunement. And what can I get from that? Or what does it tell me about these works? And what do these works tell us about a larger, a larger set of social relations if we think about attunement.
And so when a work expresses the epic highs and lows of blackness to a degree that is forceful enough to trigger the full sensory experience of hapticity, which, if a spectator is willing enough to be attuned to the piece and not master of it, then the work of adjacency can occur. That is a black gaze. It is a critical process of spectatorship.
A black gaze is a gaze that puts you in relationship to blackness and anti-blackness in a way that requires you to do a certain kind of ethical work, a certain kind of effective work, a certain kind of effective labor. So it is the work of when it's present. It is the work of care and being put into the position of needing to care and being accountable to care. One of the things that I describe it as is it's a way of looking alongside, right? So looking alongside the precarity of blackness or the ways in which blackness has been made precarious, how it's been made disposable, how it's been made fungible. And in that proximity, to be forced to confront your own privilege sometimes, to be forced to embrace that and to move towards a different kinds of transformative politics.
Tina believes very deeply in the power of art. The works that she talks about have the capacity to change the world. Okay, now, so if anything we've said so far seems sus to you, a little vague, smells like some bullshit, just know you are not alone. All this to me sounds like 2012 Tumblr era check your privilege nonsense. Tina isn't really rigorous about the labor of adjacency and what that entails. She doesn't give us any roadmap to what reparative work looks like. What is the impact of this work if people are actually doing it? It's all very ill-defined.
Could you please explain the word adjacency?
No, I can't. Yes.
Because you used it a lot and I don't really know what it means.
Okay, so that might be a sign that I was not successful in my presentation.
Because everything is kind of esoteric and amorphous, it's really hard to grasp the book's motto that a black gaze requires the effective labor of adjacency.
What defines and unites their divergent practices is their ability to make audiences work. They refuse to create spectators, as it's neither easy nor possible to passively consume their art.
Because the book might as well have been called Lessons in Tautology. Throughout it, Tina uses hapticity and adjacency and black gaze to define each other and themselves. Each sentence is a new permutation of those three words. Like with check your privilege, a black gaze is really easy to project onto. The closest productive clip that I could find of Tina speaking about how adjacency works isn't even directly about the Black gaze, but in it she says this.
And the one thing I would say is that I don't think that what we're experiencing in this protest is empathy. I think it's implication. Right? I think it's complicity. I think that that is what is mobilizing a lot of folks, is that suddenly it's not about empathy. It's about, I bear responsibility for this. I am, and if I do not do something, I am complicit with it. And I find that much, much more powerful than empathy. And I want to, I really want that to be mobilizing, because it's a much more honest relationship to white supremacy, right? It's a much more honest relationship to anti-Blackness. Is to say, I am implicated and potentially complicit, and therefore I must act.
Keeping in mind that this talk happened in June of 2020, if this is any indication of what that labor and transformation looks like, then we are in some shit. Because a lot of those people that she's talking about went right back to politics and life as normal come November 2020. And nothing was really materially transformed. But what's worse, Tina says Black contemporary art is transforming the art world, and that art institutions are doing that effective labor. Is the Whitney doing effective labor when it buys Black art for cheap, unbeknownst to the Black artists who are priced their work affordably so that working class Black people can acquire art as part of a fundraiser to aid Black advocacy groups?
I don't think.
Change the Museum started in 2020, and it posts anonymous stories by museum and gallery workers detailing racial and gender pay gaps, racist work environments, etc. Many of the artists in their transformative work, as Tina might call it, have played these institutions, once again begging the question of what transformation actually looks like. I wonder the extent to which that these artworks are transforming the institutions vis-a-vis the impact of the summer of 2020 and the labor movement sparked by COVID. We saw something similar to this in a different industry in 2016 in the Oscar So White campaign, which led to basically everything Black winning in 2017.
Moonlight.
And was it
Best
actually
Picture.
Transformative or just to save face? And I think looking
And the
at
Oscar
Oscars 2018 and
goes to
onward, it's very clear that it was
Green
the
Book.
latter. How Tina asks us to conceptualize our interactions with art anew is thought-provoking and intriguing, but when she talks about effective and transformative labor, it's like the Teaches of Peaches. A Black gaze reminds me of our conversation about Black trauma, which we said reveals more about you than it does anything meaningful about the state of Black art. I think how she talks about the labor of adjacency reveals a lot.
It is not about sharing the pain or suffering of differently racialized subjects. It is recognizing the disparity between your position and theirs and working to address it. It demands the effective labor of adjacency. It is the work of feeling done both in spite and because of these differences, and choosing to feel across that difference, rather than with or for someone in very different circumstances. Far from the satisfaction of identification with someone less fortunate, less secure, or utterly precarious, hapticity describes a commitment to feeling the discomfort of being better off and doing the work of making that discomfort generate a different outcome.
Whatever that means.
The ghost of Toni Morrison is haunting the hell out of these statements.
It's even there in some African American fiction, or I can feel that gaze, that they're really not talking to me. You know, if you write a book and call it Invisible Man, invisible to whom? Not me.
Who needs to be building relationships with whom? Who is in a very different circumstance than Black people? Who is discomforted by being better off? Tina says that she wrote the book for a nondescript audience.
In terms of the audience question, there is no specific audience that it's directed to. I don't write books for a specific audience. I write books for everyone.
And this, for me, makes a Black gaze wholly useless. For most of the book, adjacency seems to be addressing white people. The only time that she addresses Black people is when talking about respectability politics, how the discomfort we, which again, who is we, feel when looking at images that challenges respectability. That work requires us to investigate why we feel uncomfortable. Campt uses Dina Lawson's work to explicate this.
We must work to confront our resistance to seeing flawed but beautiful bodies of Black women who refuse to be shamed as they display themselves publicly with dignity and purpose.
Again, I don't know of anybody in my personal life who has difficulty looking at Dina's photos, but where I do see people being uncomfortable is in the relationship between Dina and her subjects. Placing the subjects in a hostile environment like galleries and the disparity between what Dina gets paid for those images and what her subjects are paid. It's not a question of spectator and art, but the social and economic situations these images are, one, built on in their creation, and two, placed in once displayed. And if a black gaze is truly transformative, how is Dina's work transforming those relationships?
It is collaborative to the extent that it is an invitation that they willingly take up. Not always seamlessly. She gets questioned a lot about why me? Why this? Who are you? What are you doing with this? What is going to happen to those? But she does have a deep investment in the subjects that she photographs and the staging of those images. So I think that they have a complicated form of agency if we think about agency not necessarily as control, right, but inclusion in a dialogue in the production of an image and a piece of art, right? So any artistic subject, right, is participating to some extent. They don't have control necessarily over the final product, right? But at the same time, I think that that Dina is much more solicitous than one would imagine she is, and that there's a really complex form of agency of they cannot be photographed without their permission, and at the same time, it is not a journalistic photograph; it is an artistic photograph.
From what I can tell from my photographer friends, this is a pretty standard relationship. Dina is immensely talented, of course, and deserves to be paid as such, but her photos work because of how vulnerable her subjects are, and this is something that Tina would attest to. And if her work is a dialogue, then wouldn't paying her subjects commensurate to that vulnerability, which makes her art haptic in the first place, be transformative? Is this the kind of transformation a black gaze is calling for? You couldn't know, because Tina's conceptualization of a black gaze, which again recalibrates relationships of looking, overlooks one very important relationship, that of the subject and the artist. But jumping back to the conversation of how Tina talks about respectability, there is no threshold for anything. What qualifies a work being productively uncomfortable, or work that is uncomfortable but isn't exploitative of blackness or black people, or even a spectator steeped in respectability. Because it's so loose and vague, as I said earlier, it's really easy to project onto. I wonder what Tina has to say about the Black Book or Slave Play. Are the critics of those works uncomfortable because the work challenges respectability, or are the women who say Jeremy creates nasty caricatures of black women correct? Can we be uncomfortable with Mapplethorpe's work because he was a weirdo fetishizer, or are we not attuned to the work? Because a black gaze is so personal to her way of engaging with art as a professor at Brown University, it doesn't seem viable in a general sense. Her method is very classed and inaccessible. So much of her work here relies on conversations with the artist friends she talks about, especially since a handful of the work that she talks about she saw in earlier iterations. She's engaging with the process of art. She did studio visits with the artist, traveled to galleries to see the work multiple times. This is something that most people can't do and don't have access to. Tina catalogs her response to a work each time she encounters it, and that process influenced her ideas of hapticity and adjacency. So if one is, say, monetarily locked out of seeing a work multiple times, how then does a black gaze work? Perhaps by looking at it online.
Perhaps not.
Central to Campt's engagement with Lawson's work is the magnitude of the photographs. Because they're blown up big enough that the subjects are near human size, it's their grandeur that forces the effective labor of adjacency. I came to Lawson's work in 2016 with the Freetown sound cover. It wasn't until 2021's Grief and Grievance that I saw her work in person. And while I had seen some of those photos online beforehand, seeing them big as shit changed my engagement with them. So then, how does a black gaze operate if many people cannot engage with the work because they cannot travel due to money or health concerns or any reason? I get that Tina is friends with these artists. She's mostly interested in contemporary art, and this is the work that led her to a black gaze. But her refusal to engage with other art forms is a huge oversight. If anything, contemporary art should have been the starting point. It's a huge disservice to a black gaze to not engage with TikToks, Instagram curators, straight-to-streaming movies, street artists, etc. There's certainly a generational gap that's at play here, like my good sis is screen capping with the YouTube UI still intact, so I have to keep that in mind. But I also think classes B beating the shit out of a black gaze? What utility does adjacency have for poor black people who are the subjects of work by rich black artists displayed in white institutions for a mostly wealthy white audience? To whom are poor black people adjacent to in this situation? Why must they perform restorative labor with those people who are making a buck off of their experiences? She writes beautifully about AJ's work, which remixes viral clips, regular black folk documenting and creating skits of their experiences, and AJ even uses the video work of icon Jack Mizrahi, a legend in the ball scene. AJ's work is considered a black gaze, but the source material isn't. Why? I haven't heard the term high art in a minute, but that's one of Campt's favorite phrases.
It challenges the gatekeepers of black respectability, of who gets to count as high art. Right. And so our sense of propriety needs to be challenged, because in not challenging it, we're assuming that it is shared, and therefore it becomes a norm. And that's precisely what Dina is asking us to rethink. What are the norms, right, of what counts as high art? What are the norms of what Black folks allow of ourselves to be shown? You know, normally we think of popular culture as being directed towards the young. And what I have found is that young people are seeking out high culture, right? They are seeking out the high art forms and works of Black contemporary artists. So the reason that Love is the Message came to have this extraordinary reach is because people heard about it and then went to festivals, art galleries, wherever it would appear. So the line between circulation and popular access, I think, has shifted, right? Because social media can drive people into the Guggenheim. And I don't know, you know, the Guggenheim does not have the outreach into the Black community that one would want.
There's a lot of low art that doesn't need to do Black community outreach like the Guggenheim does, because that's the built-in audience. Tyler Perry and BET have that audience because that's who they are speaking to. If the Guggenheim still doesn't have that outreach, maybe the work isn't so haptic to make white institutions do transformative work. And we do have uncomfortable conversations in low art as well. Precious sparked a conversation about respectability politics and what of ourselves we allow to be shown, something that Tina praises about Lawson's work. Even though I think adjacency is kind of a silly thing, I do think it would have been productive for Tina to do that work in relation to class positionality, to acknowledge that a Black gaze privileges metropolitan people who have access to a variety of prestigious institutions that are monetarily attractive to these artists, wealthy people who have the time, money, or invites to see the same work multiple times, people who only think something is valuable if it's framed in a gallery. As Tina puts it,
you know, people are grateful when you elevate the mundane forms of vernacular photography towards something that is seen as having either aesthetic value or scholarly value.
It seems like if one were to craft a Black gaze, one would try to speak about the many manifestations of how Black people make, see, exhibit, and engage with art. Is a Black gaze worth postulating if it only works for Ivy League professors engaging with high contemporary art? According to Dr. Tina M. Campt, it is. If this were just a book of criticism of the artists Tina is writing about and how she came to her process of interacting with art, it'd be amazing. Tina writes so evocatively of art. How she describes the work is almost art in itself. But to extrapolate how this work moved her into a paradigm of spectatorship is a bit much, especially since there's no follow through with what effective labor really means, what it looks like, how it operates, and the whole speaking to white people and classicism stuff as well. But that's it for today. I'm curious to know your thoughts on A Black Gaze if you read it. If not, I have a bunch of videos and talkbacks of Tina extrapolating on the idea of a Black gaze. So go check those out and let me know your thoughts, comment, or hit me up on Twitter at Vibration Cinema. Otherwise, you know the drill. Like, comment, share, subscribe if you haven't already. Love you all madly. See you on the next one.